Constellation of Endless Blight is the debut full-length album from Festergore. This is a Staten Island, New York-based death metal band, and one that has they've had an interesting walk-up to this record in the sense that they're just kind of ready to go with it. They've only been around for just a few years. They put out an EP or two, and they're still suffering from a little bit of what I would consider identity crisis, in the sense that they haven't really picked a lane, and they don't really need to, but generally we could consider this album influenced by old school death metal and the current slow stepping form of moshable death metal that folks are calling new old school death metal today. It is not necessarily deep underground dirt, and it's not necessarily the reaching for like a Frozen Soul type sound either. Finding what their sound is has been a little bit of a struggle up to this point. In 2022 it was a little bit more clear with that EP, Synchronizing the Cosmos, but overall we're getting a little bit of Florida-style death metal, a little bit of Malevolent Creation in there. You can tell there's some thrash metal in their background. You can appreciate a lot of just 90s death metal signifiers here, but they haven't necessarily pulled out anything incredibly their own just yet on this album. And we'll get an example of that right here with a clip. So the reason I focus on identity is because that's all you really have today, unless you're just trying to sound a lot like Skeletal Remains or something like that. And I think that by focusing on maybe a Swedish style song here, a Morbid Angel type riff here and there, we're getting the general sense of general death metal presence, but the riffcraft doesn't really have a knack to it. It's just kind of all over the place, and there's nothing that impressive or unique or stand out there that we're neither relying on references to be interesting or content to be interesting. And the essential weight of this record is that it is death metal, and it is pretty good death metal. The vocalist is pretty intense. I think he's got a nice brutal register, and especially on the previous EP you could tell his diction was very specific and carried out in a methodical way. I think that's kind of the best part of this record overall, is that the vocalist has a talent for placement. And what happens here is that the riffs just kind of take us all over the place, and it's a ride, and it's not a bad one at all. This is a solid death metal record. There was no reason to come back to this where it stood out in a way that said this is Festergore. I think that otherwise this is a very well curated record. The album art is fantastic. Like the sound of this record is great. I think that there is a connection to be made if you're just a fan of death metal and you're looking for riffs, but overall I couldn't score all of it that high, because it was just kind of hitting just a slightly above average note most of the time. Far from the worst death metal album of the month, and one of the stronger, more memorable things to be released in this style of late, but not something I could say is so shockingly good that it's going to catch a ton of ears. So worth checking out. See what you think for yourself. It released on November 29th, and check it out now. Life,